You might have naturally dry earwax. Let's start with something most people never think about: earwax. For many people, earwax is yellowish, sticky, and sometimes oily. But some people produce something completely different: dry earwax. This unusual trait is strongly associated with a particular version of a gene called ABCC11. One form of this gene is much more common in populations from East Asia, while another form is more common elsewhere around the world. The difference can determine whether your earwax is wet and sticky or dry and flaky. And here's the fascinating part: the same gene is also associated with underarm odor. People with the genetic variant associated with dry earwax often produce less of certain compounds that skin bacteria convert into strong body odor. So, something as ordinary as checking your earwax could actually give you a tiny clue about your DNA. Your body is basically carrying a genetic signature right in your ears. You may be able to taste things other people can't. Imagine eating a perfectly normal vegetable. You taste it, and it seems incredibly bitter. Your friend takes a bite. They barely notice anything. Are they pretending? Maybe not. You might simply have a genetic difference affecting your sense of taste. One famous example involves a gene called TAS2R38. This gene helps control how your taste receptors respond to certain bitter compounds. Some versions make people much more sensitive to bitterness. These people are sometimes called supertasters. For them, foods like broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, or certain leafy vegetables can taste dramatically more bitter. But there's a twist. Being a supertaster isn't necessarily better. It can make some foods unpleasant, but it can also make certain flavors much more intense. So the reason you absolutely love, or completely hate, some foods might not be about personality at all. It could partly be written in your DNA. You could have naturally high bone density. Now imagine having bones that are unusually strong without doing anything special. No extreme workout routine, no superhero training, just genetics. Scientists have identified rare variants in genes involved in the WWNT signaling pathway, including LRP5, that can cause unusually high bone density. People carrying certain variants can have bones that are significantly denser than average. In some cases, this has been associated with unusual resistance to fractures. It sounds like a biological superpower. But genetics is rarely that simple. The same biological pathway is involved in many processes throughout the body, and different mutations can have completely different effects. So having a rare genetic variant doesn't automatically mean someone has invincible bones. Still, it demonstrates something incredible. Your skeleton isn't just a collection of calcium. Its properties are influenced by a complex genetic blueprint. You might have a genetic advantage against certain infections. Now we get into something much more fascinating. Some people carry genetic variants that can change how their cells interact with infectious diseases. One famous example involves CCR5. CCR5 is a receptor found on the surface of certain immune cells. A particular mutation called CCR5 delta 32 can result in reduced or absent CCR5 receptors on the cell surface. And this matters because some strains of HIV use CCR5 as a doorway to enter immune cells. People who inherit two copies of the CCR5 delta 32 variant can have substantial resistance to infection by CCR5 using HIV strains. But there is an important catch. It doesn't make someone immune to HIV. Other strains can use different pathways, and genetics never replaces prevention or medical care. Still, this is an extraordinary example of how a tiny difference in DNA can change the interaction between a human body and a virus. Your cells have doors. Sometimes your genes determine which doors exist. You might have the ability to digest milk as an adult. Here's another genetic trait that seems completely ordinary in some parts of the world, but is actually unusual from an evolutionary perspective. Most mammals stop producing large amounts of the enzyme lactase after childhood. Lactase breaks down lactose, the sugar found in milk, but some humans continue producing high levels of lactase throughout adulthood. This is called lactase persistence, and it is strongly associated with genetic variants that became common in certain populations with long histories of dairy farming. In other words, some humans evolved the ability to keep digesting milk efficiently because milk became an important part of their diet. It's one of the clearest examples of gene culture coevolution. Humans changed their culture. They started keeping animals for milk. And over generations, natural selection favored genetic variants that helped some populations use that food source. So, if you can drink a glass of milk without digestive problems, you're carrying a small piece of evolutionary history. You might have naturally red hair. Red hair is one of the most recognizable examples of a relatively uncommon genetic trait. It is strongly associated with variants of a gene called MC1R. This gene influences the type of melanin your body produces. Certain MC1R variants shift pigment production toward pheomelanin, contributing to red or reddish hair and often lighter skin. But here's something interesting. You don't necessarily have to have bright red hair for MC1R variants to matter. Some people carry genetic variants associated with red pigmentation without displaying the classic red-haired appearance. Genetics is often more complicated than simple one gene equals one trait. Multiple genes can influence pigmentation, and different combinations can produce a huge range of appearances. So even if you don't look like the stereotypical redhead, your DNA might still contain some of the same genetic ingredients. You may have unusually fast muscle performance. Ever wondered why some people seem naturally explosive? They sprint faster, jump higher, accelerate quickly, and seem to develop power unusually easily. One gene that has received a lot of attention is ACTN3. It produces a protein found primarily in fast-twitch muscle fibers. A particular ACTN3 variant results in the absence of functional alpha-actinin 3 protein. Interestingly, this variant is actually quite common in humans, so it isn't a rare gene. But its effects demonstrate something fascinating about genetic diversity. Elite athletic performance is not controlled by one gene. Thousands of genetic and environmental factors can contribute to performance, including training, nutrition, body structure, motivation, recovery, and many other biological variables. There is no single athlete gene. Instead, your DNA contains countless small influences that can interact with your environment. Your body is more like a complicated recipe than a single instruction. You could be able to smell certain chemicals extremely well. Here's a strange one. Some people can smell compounds that others barely notice. Your sense of smell is controlled by hundreds of different olfactory receptor genes, and humans differ dramatically in which versions of these receptors they carry. One famous example involves the smell of asparagus urine. After eating asparagus, some people produce sulfur-containing compounds in their urine that can have a distinctive odor, but not everyone can smell it, and there are actually two separate genetic factors involved. Some people may produce the odor more strongly. Others may produce it but lack the ability to detect it efficiently. That means two people can literally experience the same biological event but perceive completely different realities. One person says, "I smell nothing." The other says, "How can you not smell that?" Your DNA can influence the sensory world you experience. You might have unusually high altitude adaptation. Now let's travel thousands of meters above sea level. The air gets thinner. Oxygen becomes harder to obtain. For most people, living permanently at extreme altitude can place significant stress on the body. But populations living for generations in high-altitude regions have developed remarkable genetic adaptations. One of the best-known examples involves people living on the Tibetan Plateau. Variants involving genes such as EPAS1 are associated with adaptations to low-oxygen environments. Rather than simply producing more red blood cells, some high-altitude populations have evolved physiological strategies that help them function in oxygen-poor environments. This is one of the clearest demonstrations of natural selection in humans. Their ancestors lived for generations in an environment that challenged normal human physiology. Over time, certain genetic variants became more common. The result? Humans who can thrive where most people struggle. You could have naturally low LDL cholesterol. Now here's a genetic trait that sounds less exciting, but could be extremely important. Some people carry rare variants affecting a gene called PCSK9. Certain loss-of-function variants can result in lower levels of LDL cholesterol, sometimes called bad cholesterol. Researchers became especially interested in these variants because people carrying them can have unusually low LDL levels and, in some cases, lower risk of cardiovascular disease. This discovery also helped inspire modern cholesterol-lowering treatments that target PCSK9. So, a rare genetic variation found in a relatively small number of people helped scientists understand an important biological pathway. Sometimes nature performs the experiment first. Scientists simply have to notice. You might have a genetic variant that changes how medicines affect you. Here's one of the most useful examples of hidden genetic variation. Your DNA can influence how your body processes certain medications. Genes involved in drug metabolism, such as members of the CYP450 family, can exist in different versions. These differences can cause some people to process certain medications more quickly or slowly than others. That means two people taking the same drug at the same dose can sometimes experience different effects. This field is called pharmacogenomics, and it is becoming increasingly important in personalized medicine. But don't assume that knowing one genetic variant means you can automatically determine which medication is right for you. Real drug response is complicated. Doctors consider many factors, including age, other medications, medical history, and sometimes genetic testing. Still, the principle is incredible. Your DNA doesn't just influence how you look. It can influence how your body interacts with chemicals. You could have blue eyes because of a genetic change from the past. Blue eyes might look completely normal today, but from an evolutionary perspective, they tell an interesting story. Eye color is influenced by multiple genes, but a genetic change near the OCA2/HERC2 region plays a major role in blue eye pigmentation. Researchers have proposed that many blue-eyed people share a common ancestral genetic change affecting regulation of OCA2. Instead of producing large amounts of melanin in the iris, the resulting biology contributes to the blue appearance. And because blue eyes are relatively uncommon globally, looking into a mirror could mean you're seeing the result of a genetic variation that became widespread only relatively recently in human history. Your eye color is not just an aesthetic feature, it is part of your evolutionary story. Thanks for watching. And remember, your DNA may be hiding more secrets than you think.